Enter on three. One, two, three. I am here with Alexander Mercouris, editor in chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about Theresa May. She
Mm,
has resigned.
mm.
She gave a tearful address outside of 10 Downing Street. And that's it. June 7th.
Mm.
Alexander, your
Well,
first thoughts of her announcement.
I've been predicting that she was about to resign since the autumn, and I predicted it I don't know how many times. It's finally and very belatedly happened. It's entirely a good thing. She's been a terrible prime minister. I mean, one has to feel sorry for somebody resigning in that way, but I mean, she has completely messed up Brexit. She's brought her party into crisis. The government is paralysed. The House of Commons is paralysed. Confidence in the political system has all but collapsed. Brexit has not happened. And it's absolutely vitally necessary that we have a fresh start with someone else. Now, I'm not sure that things will get better, but they could hardly have been worse than they were under Theresa May. So I'm sorry to say it, but I have to say it. I'm glad she's gone.
Thank you to everyone that is joining us in the chat, and we'll get to some questions towards the end of the
Mm.
show. Thank you for your super chat, Valley. Alexander, were those real tears?
Oh, I think so. I mean, Theresa May's always been very sorry for herself. I mean, she finds it difficult to be sorry for other people, but she's always been sorry for herself. She was clearly desperate to cling on to her job as long as she could. She looks back on a premiership which has had no achievements of any sort to, praise or to take credit for. She was obviously looking for something she could show that she did positively as Prime Minister. She wasn't able to produce anything. I mean, she talked about recycling plastic or things like that kind. So, I mean, the fact that she's gone in this way was humiliating for her. And I think those were real tears, no question about it.
Yep. All right. So as Nega says, May ends in June. That's a nice
No,
way to,
indeed.
to put it.
Well, indeed.
And
Well, indeed.
yes, yes, well, indeed. Alexander, what's we have the elections coming up. Actually, people voted, so we'll get the results, I believe, on Sunday.
Yes.
What do you think's going to happen there? You think Faraj is going to sweep the board?
Absolutely. I mean, this is why Theresa May is going. Let's be absolutely clear about this. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this saga of Theresa May going on and on, repackaging her utterly dreadful withdrawal agreement and representing it time and again to the House of Commons, only for it to be rejected again and again and again. It had just gone on forever if Nigel Farage hadn't entered the fray, formed his Brexit party, and been about to sweep the board in the Euro elections. The latest opinion poll, the one just before the European elections, put the Conservatives on 7%. And there's an expression in Britain attributed to Samuel Johnson that nothing concentrates the mind so much as the prospect of getting hanged. And for Conservative MPs, facing the reality of a possible wipeout, not just in a Euro election, but in a general election where they would all lose their seats, and with the Conservative Party facing an existential uh, 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 catastrophe which might have put its very existence in jeopardy. The decision was finally made after she came along, made a further extraordinary decision to open up the possibility of a second referendum, something that she'd always ruled out. At that point, it was just too much. And the men in grey suits of the Conservative Party came along and told her that she had to go. And go she's gone.
Yeah, she miscalculated big time. Who do you think advised her to take that route? Second referendum, fourth go at a vote in the House of Commons for her plan. Where did she get that idea? Was she dumb
I,
enough to come up with that on her own, or
no, I don't think so. I'm going to make a guess, actually, that it came from partly, I suspect, from some people in Europe. I mean, it's known that she's been in close contact with people like Juncker throughout these negotiations. And I suspect also from people within the civil service. After the general election, she sacked her two political advisors and brought in civil servants, people like Ollie Robbins, who've been running this negotiation. These people don't have any real understanding of British politics. But Theresa May, as often happens with prime ministers who are extremely insecure and have lost confidence, the confidence of their own party, they surround themselves with civil servants and technicians. And they said to her, look, the only way we can get this thing through the House of Commons is by getting Labour to vote with us. And that means giving them a second referendum. And in fact, what happened was Labour still said they wouldn't vote for the deal. And all it did by promising or making possible a second referendum is it enraged the Conservative Party. So it was bad advice, badly received by Theresa May, and it has ended with her going.
All right, Alexander, the bookers in the UK, the odds makers, they're already saying that Boris Johnson is now the odds-on favorite to be the next prime minister. 8 to 11 are the odds. Rounding out the top 5, Alexander, Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab, Andrea Leadsom, Michael Gove, Jeremy Hunt. What do you make of that list? Accurate?
Well, accurate up to a point. I still find it very difficult to believe that someone like Andrea Leadsom, who, whatever her skills, is not terribly well known in the country, is going to become prime minister or leader of the Conservative Party. And Michael Gove isn't even a candidate at this moment. I would have thought that this is Boris Johnson's election to lose. I mean, admittedly, Boris Johnson is one of the most accident-prone politicians that I can imagine. I mean, he's got a genius for messing up, but he will really need to mess up badly if he's going to lose this election. I mean, he's positioned himself since the autumn as the person who's going to carry Brexit through. He's got the support because of that, of the membership of the Conservative Party in the country. The Parliamentary Party doesn't like him, but I think they know perfectly well that if they try to block him, there would be a massive uproar in the country, amongst the Conservative Party in the country. So I would have thought that he must be very much the favourite now. In fact, I think that the probability is he will win by a landslide.
Who is Boris Johnson, Alexander? What are his positions? Is he for a hard Brexit? Is he for a no-deal Brexit? Is he masquerading as someone that wants Brexit, but he really wants Remain? Is he a globalist? Is he elitist? What's his relationship with Trump? Who is this guy? The real Boris Johnson.
Well, the answer is that he's all the things you've just said. Boris Johnson is one of those individuals who has an extraordinary ability to be all things at different times whenever it suits him. I mean, he's
an opportunist.
He's an opportunist to his fingertips. He's for good relations with Russia. He's for bad relations with Russia. He wants to get on with Donald Trump. He doesn't want to get on with Donald Trump. Whatever suits him at any particular moment, he will be. But if I may say, on Brexit, where famously he actually wrote just before the referendum 2 position papers, one supporting Brexit, the other opposing it. He wrote them one after the other, but eventually decided that he would support Brexit because he thought that was the fastest route to become prime minister. On Brexit, he is now so heavily identified with Brexit that whatever he now thinks, I think even he realizes that he has to see it through if he becomes prime minister. And he made a comment today that Britain will definitely leave the European Union on the 31st of October, deal or no deal. Now, that really implies that unless he can get the European Union to change the deal, which they have negotiated with Theresa May, which the European Union has said they won't do, that he will lead Britain, if he is Prime Minister, out of the European Union on the 31st of October without a deal. And I think he would find it extremely difficult, politically impossible, to go back on that.
Yeah, Boris Johnson appears to me to be a bit of a clown. Many people in the
Yes,
chat also have the clown symbol kind of going on. He seems very clownish.
Yes,
I mean,
he is.
But how was he as a mayor? I mean, for London,
Well,
did he do a good job? Objective.
Well, let's put it like this. He didn't make things worse or dramatically worse. I don't think he was a particularly good mayor. I think he spent most of his time as mayor writing rather clever articles for the Daily Telegraph. I don't think he's very interested in administration. I don't think he really cares much about such things. But he had the good sense to let other people get on with the job. And though he didn't do anything very dramatic, I mean, London ticked along perfectly well whilst he was mayor. His predecessor, Ken Livingstone, who I know many people don't like, but who is a grimly competent administrator, did an awful lot more. So I suspect the same would be true of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. He's not much of a manager. He's not much of an administrator. He changes his mind whenever it suits him. I don't think he'd be a particularly good Prime Minister. I'm sure he wouldn't be. He's very disliked around the world. The US doesn't think much of him. The Europeans loathe him. The Russians can't take him seriously. The Chinese think him ridiculous. But if you want somebody to see Brexit through, which has to be the priority at the moment, he's probably the person to do it.
What does he need to change in the current deal to make it acceptable?
No, he needs to ditch it. I mean, I don't think any part
Get rid of the whole thing?
Get rid of the whole thing. I don't think any part of the present deal is acceptable. That's my own personal view. I mean, if he takes as the starting point the present deal and tries to negotiate on the basis of it, then I think he's toast. I don't think he's going to get anywhere. I mean, what he needs to do is come along to the Europeans, say this deal is totally and completely unacceptable. It won't be acceptable to the British people. It won't be acceptable to the Conservative Party. It won't be acceptable to me as Prime Minister of Britain. We've got to move to an entirely different arrangement, one based upon a negotiation for a free trade zone. And unless I have a commitment to that, we're leaving on the 31st of October without a deal. Now, whether Boris Johnson has the sense or the practical grasp of realities to understand that, and whether if he does understand that, he has the strength of character and the strength of purpose to see it through, that's an entirely different matter. But if you want my opinion as to what he should do if he becomes Prime Minister, that is what he should do.
Well, this is not only up to Boris Johnson, this is also up to the EU. So if he goes to the EU and says, guys, this deal's off the table, I want to renegotiate, clean slate, what will the EU say? What will Michel Barnier and Juncker say?
They will say no. And if Boris Johnson has a grasp of realities, he will understand that. And he will prepare Britain in that case to the extent that it's now possible to prepare Britain, because the 31st of October isn't far away, for a no-deal Brexit, which, as you and I have discussed many times, may cause some short-term disruption, but Britain is fully capable of coping with. I should add, by the way, that there are very few parliamentary days left before the 31st of October. It may seem weeks away, but Parliament goes into recess over the summer. It doesn't really come back until the end of September, early October. So there aren't many days during that period for any great sabotage to be done. And there is a legal opinion which has been published by the Institute for Government, which says quite clearly that if the Prime Minister of Great Britain decides that he is going to go for a no-deal Brexit, there are very few, in fact, there is no practical way of preventing him doing so. There's been some talk that they could call a vote of no confidence in him. But my own personal view, even about that, is that a Prime Minister committed to a Brexit on the 31st of October could spin that out and delay it until after that date has passed.
if there's uh, if there's one country, Alexander, we've said it many times, that has the strength and it has the commitment to be massively successful after leaving the EU, and say they do go through, after going through, say, a 3 to 6 month kind of downturn, but to get out of it and just be a huge success, it's without a doubt, I think, the UK. If Boris Johnson positions himself, and if he does position himself as the prime minister, say he does, lead the Tories, he becomes the prime minister, he weathers the storm for, say, 6 months, and then the UK machine really starts to kick in. The economic machine, all the levers really start to turn.
Yeah.
And the UK gets out of the EU and just becomes a massive success. Boris Johnson becomes one of the best prime ministers of the UK, yes or no?
Well, I wouldn't say one of the best, but perhaps one of the most successful, which amounts
he could position himself there. He could put himself in that
Yeah.
position.
Yeah, and he's actually said that, by the way. He published an article a few days ago in the Daily Telegraph, where he obviously is a columnist, in which he made that very point. So he's well aware of it. He has to get through the 31st of October. And I mean, it's possible to do that. And then he has to weather the turbulence that comes after that. Of course, the Conservative Party doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons. He's also got the problem that there's about 60 Conservative MPs who are irreconcilable Remainers and who would be looking to sabotage him and who might, during that 3 to 6 month period, bring down his government. But if he can get through that period, and if he doesn't mess up, as I said, he's not a good manager, then, as I said, it's entirely possible that he could start to reap the political dividends, both for himself and for the Conservative Party, and become the Prime Minister who delivered Brexit.
How can he mess up? How can someone mess up, say, from now until October 31st? What are the pitfalls facing Boris Johnson or anybody that's now going to be taking over after Theresa May?
Well, with Boris Johnson, he has a genius sometimes for messing up. So let's not say definitely that he's not going to mess up. There are things he can go wrong. Firstly, he has to keep at least most of his cabinet with him for the long ride, and that's going to be tough because lots of the people in the cabinet don't especially like him. So he's got to face down people like Philip Hammond, who's the Chancellor, who is an arch Remainer. People like Amber Rudd, who is another minister in the cabinet, who's also an arch Remainer. He's got to face those sort of people down. He's got to deal with Michael Gove, who is his former friend and now mortal enemy and deadly rival, who's been angling very hard to prevent him becoming Prime Minister and will not be happy if he does become Prime Minister. He's also got to keep the civil service machine working, and that's not easy, given that the civil service machine is very committed to Remain. So he's got lots of problems, and of course he's going to have a very, very hostile media. I mean, there'll be parts of the media which will support him, like the Daily Telegraph, where, as I said, he's a columnist, but other parts of the media won't, and he will face a relentless media campaign. So there's lots of things that could go wrong, and if he doesn't have good and loyal people around him, and if whoever he appoints as Chancellor struggles to get a budget through the House of Commons, then it's entirely possible to see this thing going wrong. I mean, a Prime Minister Boris Johnson, assuming that's what we get in a few weeks' time, is going to have a very tough first year.
Who do you think is the most capable to take the UK through this? Do you think it's Johnson?
No,
do you think it's someone else? Who do you think is the most? Who would you like to see kind of steer the ship?
Of the present, of the top list of 5 that you said,
expanded even more,
yes.
even more.
Well,
Outside of yourself, I think many of the
then,
viewers here would
yeah.
like to see you
Yeah.
running the show. but who would you like to see?
I mean, to be straightforward, none of them, frankly, inspire. I mean, that's been one of the great problems. I don't really feel that any of them combines all the various qualities that would be needed. I mean, Dominic Raab, for example, is said to be a very capable man. He's a former lawyer. He's the sort of person who looks like a good administrator. And he was apparently a perfectly good and decent Minister of Justice. I don't think he has the charisma, really, for these sort of times. No one that I can see brings all the elements together. If you want me to say who is the most talented politician on the Brexit side in Britain at the moment, as I've said many times, it is Nigel Farage, who isn't in the running because he's not a member of the House of Commons and he's not a member of the Conservative Party. But if you want some reasonable assurance that there's a good chance that Brexit will happen, then simply because he's burnt his boats in such a way and because he's got some degree of popular traction, Boris Johnson is probably the least bad of a bad lot. And I say that with full agreement with all the criticisms that are made, and that he's not a particularly serious person. By the way, in spite of what we were saying about him, appearing to be a successful prime minister, I don't think Boris will be prime minister for very long. I think at some point, if he delivers Brexit, if he gets the economy whirring again outside the European Union, there will be pressure on him to move aside so that some rather more conventional person takes over.
Really? So you think they would try to push Prime Minister Johnson out?
I think at some point that will probably happen. I mean, I think there'll be more and more comments about how eccentric and difficult he is. The Conservative Party in Parliament doesn't like him, and that's his problem. In fact, we would have a very interesting situation if he did become Prime Minister, where we would have the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, both supported by the grassroots and unpopular with the parliamentary leadership of their two parties. And that would be an interesting and very strange state of affairs.
Right, Alexander, sum it up a little bit as to what's happened this last, say, 6 months and say these next 6 months going forward. Labour, stronger or weaker? Corbyn, stronger or weaker? Farage, Brexit Party, stronger or weaker? UKIP, stronger or weaker? We already know the answer for the Tories and the Conservatives. Right. What about these other three parties?
Well, let's start with Jeremy Corbyn and Labour. I think definitely weaker. I mean, I think that the problem is not so much Jeremy Corbyn as this irreconcilable Remain element within the Labour Party has made it impossible for the Labour Party to present a constructive policy on Brexit. I mean, they've been pulled in two directions. That's made Corbyn, whose limitations as a party manager have been cruelly exposed, seem weak and prevaricating, which is what he was on Brexit. And I think definitely he appears weaker in this situation. His best bet is if Prime Minister Johnson gets Britain out of the European Union on the 31st of October, there is no deal. There is this period of economic turbulence, and the government then collapses and there's a general election. And at that point, during that period of turbulence, Jeremy Corbyn can come along and say, the Conservatives have failed in every respect, and I'm the man to put everything to rights. And at that point, I think there's a reasonable chance that he could win. But he looks a much lesser figure today than he did a year ago. UKIP is, in my opinion, finished. I think that its thunder has been completely taken away by Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. Nigel Farage, at the moment, is master of all he surveys, but if there is a Prime Minister Johnson within the next few weeks, and if Prime Minister Johnson does take Britain out of the European Union, and if it is a no deal on the 31st of October, then in a sense Farage's job really is done. And at that point, I do expect him to fade, which would be a shame in some ways, because, as I said, I think he's a talented politician. As for the other parties, I think the Liberal Democrats will then be increasingly looking, despite their recent revival, as a party that has lost its way, because it will be committed to something, the European Union, which Britain would have irretrievably left. and I think the Green Party might continue to grow in strength. So that's my general summary of the state of British politics now.
Okay, so we have a lot of people that tune into us who are UKIP supporters. So I think
I know, I know.
they're not gonna like what you said there.
No, I know, I know, I
But
know. I'm well aware of that.
can you say that UKIP
Yeah.
may not have the leadership of Farage now, but it is still a very well organized
Yes.
party? It has more of a foundation than, say, the Brexit Party. It almost seems like the Brexit Party needs what UKIP has, and UKIP needs what the Brexit Party has.
Yes, yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, the one thing I would say is this, is that the Brexit Party really isn't a party. It is a collection of people hurriedly cobbled together by Nigel Farage with a certain amount of money from wealthy donors who have been put together in a hurry to win the Euro elections and to act as a vehicle for Nigel Farage going forward. And that has been triumphantly successful, and it has taken the air out of UKIP. UKIP, by contrast, is a much older party, it's a much more established party, and it does have an organisation. If UKIP is going to prosper in the future, and there is a place for a party like UKIP, which could appeal to some people, especially working class people, in Northern England and the Midlands, then it needs a much better leadership than the one it has up to now. UKIP plus Farage was a tremendously powerful combination. UKIP minus Farage has struggled, and I'm sorry to say I think it will continue to do so.
What does Farage need to do then for the Brexit Party to get to the level where UKIP is? Is it just a matter of time, or do they have to shift once, if and when Brexit finally does wrap up? Does Farage then have to shift to start, tackling different policies?
Well, he does, but of course this is his problem because, of course, the Brexit Party has been deliberately created by him, as I said, not as a party at all, but rather as a movement on a single issue, which is Brexit. UKIP is more than that. UKIP has many ideas, which Brexit Party doesn't.
Mostly
have.
about immigration, correct? I mean, that's
well, exactly,
that's one of UKIP's big platforms.
Absolutely, absolutely. Whereas, as I said, the Brexit Party doesn't really have much to say about any of these things. So the moment that Nigel Farage tries to construct a programme for the Brexit Party that goes beyond the single issue of Brexit, the Brexit Party at that point risks disintegration because the coalition that it has, that it's been built together from, would at that moment come under very, very serious strain. I mean, the point about the Brexit Party is that Farage has conceived it in order to give himself leverage to pressure the Conservatives to deliver Brexit. Now, that is succeeding brilliantly, but it is not a party that can govern or which aspires to govern.
Could Farage ever become Prime Minister?
Well, a couple of months, I would have said impossible. And I still doubt, actually, that he's really interested in becoming Prime Minister. If
you think personally he's not interested in the job?
I think personally he's not interested in the job. If the Conservatives do something absolutely crazy and appoint another Remainer as their leader, which is not impossible. There's heavy lobbying for a man called Rory Stewart, who is a Conservative MP and Minister, who is a Remainer. If they appoint someone like him, or if Johnson does win the election and then implodes spectacularly, or botches Brexit, or carries out another Theresa May style capitulation and agrees to everything that the European Union demands, then I think at that point we would be looking at an existential crisis with the Conservative Party. And going down the line, going into the future, I think in a future general election, I think the Brexit Party will start winning seats across England from the Conservatives on a very, very big scale. And assuming that Nigel Farage is still its leader at that point, I think then we could see a Farage prime ministership starting to loom over the horizon. I think we're some way away from that position yet.
All right, let's get to some super chats.
Uh,
Alexander Valley, yes, $20 super chat. Thank you, Valley, for your super chat. From our friend Nigel, super chat. Does Alexander think the best way forward is a general election? Also, can I continue to wish upon a star to see the Oracle of London as Prime Minister? You see, they want you as Prime Minister, Alexander, but I don't think you want the job. Maybe you do. I don't know.
No, I don't want the job. Anyway, they wouldn't have me. I mean, I think all the parties would decide that me as Prime Minister would be completely unacceptable to them. If they don't like Boris Johnson, they certainly wouldn't like me. But putting that aside, putting all that aside, I think we are going to see a general election fairly soon, but not before the 31st of October, unless Boris Johnson is elected Conservative leader, messes up completely and faces a vote of no confidence, which he loses, which is possible. He is that kind of a person. There's an outside chance that someone else in the Conservative Party, if he or she becomes leader of the Conservative Party, might recklessly gamble on a general election. But again, I don't personally think it's going to happen. There is an article in the Daily Telegraph which said that the Conservative Party at this moment in time needs an election, a general election, like a hole in the head. And I'm sure that is the general sentiment amongst Conservative MPs. So I would have thought the Conservatives would resist an election. I must say that constitutionally speaking and politically speaking, there is a great deal to be said for one, because looking at the situation in Britain at the moment, a Boris Johnson prime ministership, has so many problems, potential problems, and history shows the prime ministers who are elected by their party, but not by the country, have great difficulty establishing themselves and establishing their authority, and that they tend to be ephemeral figures. So I think there's a lot to be said for a general election, but I don't personally expect one before the 31st of October.
Yeah, but a general election could mean a Corbyn prime minister.
Oh, indeed. Oh, indeed. Of course. That's why
and that would mean, I think that would mean that the UK stays in the EU.
Well, it would. Well, it would. But which is why I don't expect one before the 31st of October. I mean, I think realistically, we have to see this thing with Brexit sorted out in some form first. If Brexit doesn't happen, by the way, on the 31st of October, then I think we would be in deep crisis. And at that point, a general election becomes almost irresistible.
Okay. Super chat from Penguins fan. How the hell is Boris Johnson can become prime minister when he is out of politics?
Well, Boris Johnson is not out of politics. Boris Johnson is in politics. He is out of the cabinet and he's out of the government, but he is an MP. So he is fully eligible to become prime minister. I would say I cannot imagine any other situation apart from the one we have now, where Boris Johnson, a improbable figure that he is, would become prime minister of Britain. But we live in extraordinary times. And that is what makes the prospect of his becoming prime minister so strong.
All right. Super chat from Penguins fan. Theresa May has destroyed the UK feuding with Russia, Brexit, and others. Do you think that's a true statement?
Yes.
Especially the feuding part. We've already gone over the Brexit part pretty in depth. But what about feuding with Russia? Who Boris Johnson has also feuded with Russia and Lavrov. Oh, yeah. He's made some very bonehead statements.
Oh, he said terrible things, and he went to meet Lavrov in Moscow as foreign secretary, and it was a disastrous meeting. I mean, it demonstrated again Boris Johnson's complete inability to conduct a negotiation in a coherent way, and he came away from Moscow apparently very angry and upset because he'd been so completely outmatched by Lavrov. And the result was that relations between Russia and Britain took an even worse turn. The only thing I would say is they're so bad at the moment, largely thanks to Theresa May. I agree with the sentiment that's been expressed that she pursued this pointless and disastrous feud with Russia, I'm sorry. And, one would like to think that a new prime minister would want to change that. Now, Boris Johnson, in the past, before he became a cabinet minister, before he was appointed foreign secretary, did publish articles in the Daily Telegraph which spoke about the need for improving relations with Russia. I was naive enough to think that he might believe what he said. Always a mistake to make with Boris. But who knows? Maybe this totally unpredictable and whimsical man will come back to that position, and we'll see the absolutely blinding logic of the need for it. Because can I just say two things? Firstly, and I've said this many times, a good trading relationship between Britain and Russia could massively benefit both. What the British need after Brexit is trading partners. And they have the one thing that the Russians need most. What the Russians need is not technology, which they have in abundance. They don't need machinery or food or any of the other things. What they need is investment capital. And the City of London can provide it. Yeah. Exactly, financial services. And the City of London can provide it. It's an obvious match if only people in Britain could see it. But, at the moment, nobody does. And nobody seems to be able to see it and to break through. But the other thing is, this feud, as it's been described, is isolating Britain. Because as we cannot talk to Russia, which is, the great power in our neighbourhood, we are no longer relevant in world affairs. We don't have any traction over negotiations in Syria, in negotiations in Ukraine, on so many issues, because we won't talk to the Russians who are involved in all these conflicts, and they, of course, that way don't talk to us. So we isolate ourselves diplomatically, and we lose opportunities commercially and economically. It's a completely stupid policy. But, is Boris the man to change it? Well, we will see. He's sometimes shown glimmers of understanding of the need to change, but will he actually do it? Does he have the character and the consistency and the strength of personality to change this policy? Well, I don't know, and I have to say I doubt it.
Okay, from Stephen Alexander, could you see Portillo being offered a path back to the Tory fold?
I don't think so, and I don't think he'd want to. Michael Portillo, if I may explain to our viewers, was a very, very powerful and charismatic Conservative minister in the 1990s, when he was seen by the supporters of Margaret Thatcher as her likeliest and most plausible successor, and he was heavily involved in the plots to try and undermine John Major, who was Prime Minister in the 1990s, with widespread expectation that he would be the right man to take over and lead the Conservative Party. And he was in those days very much of a person on the anti-EU side of the Conservative Party. He lost his seat in the Blair landslide of 1997, and he's never really been a big figure in Conservative politics since then. Most of the time he's been a television commentator and such things. I just don't see him now coming back. He's been out of politics for too long. I don't see him as a mainstream figure anymore.
Okay. Super chat from Penguins fans. Apology to Mr. Mercurse, but Britain is a joke. Would you say that Britain has maneuvered itself to be a joke with Theresa May at the helm?
No need to apologise. I agree. I mean, the very fact that we're talking about Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and people, I think we know, he has got a clownish side, no question about it. I mean, shows what a very unserious country we have become. We voted in 2016 to leave the European Union. That was a clear vote, a straightforward, decisive vote to leave. 3 years later, we haven't done it. We've had this disastrous premiership of Theresa May. We've made a complete mess of our politics. We have a paralysed parliament where the only subject that people can talk about when they're not talking about Brexit and coming to no conclusion about anything is a bill about circuses. I mean, I'm being absolutely serious about this. And our foreign policy, as I've just discussed, is a total mess. How can we take ourselves seriously? We need to work very hard to do it. We have all the potential. We're a big country. We have many resources. We have many talented people. If we work hard on regaining our seriousness, we can again play an effective role in world affairs. But we need to start thinking soberly about what our genuine options are and work hard to translate what people vote for into practical action.
What are your thoughts on Sajid Javid, Alexander?
Well,
is he a contender or?
Oh yes, he is a contender. I can see him as a potential Chancellor of the Exchequer. I mean, my impression of him is that he's a fairly capable manager and administrator. He's a protege, by the way, of George Osborne, the former Chancellor and close friend of the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, who is now metamorphosed into a journalist running the Evening Standard for Yevgeny Lebedev, who is a Russian oligarch who owns the Evening Standard and who is a strong supporter, by the way, of Remain. But there we are. I can see Javid as I mean, he will certainly play an important role in a future Conservative government, whoever the Prime Minister is. And he'll remain a force, and he's not without political skills. I don't think he's ready to become Prime Minister now. And I think if he was elected Prime Minister, if he was elected leader of the Conservative Party at this time, it would be a mistake. I mean, he is again someone who, as I understand it, voted Remain in the referendum. And I don't think he's someone that the European Union would take seriously in a negotiation. And I don't think he's someone who could be prepared to go that further mile, commit Britain to leaving on the 31st of October and do so and be prepared to do so with no deal. So I don't think he's the right man at this time.
All right, a super chat from Penguins fan. When will the EU election results be? And the Brexit party, where are they right now in the polls?
Well, we will know on Sunday night. I mean, that's when they're due to be published. The reason they've been delayed, by the way, is that so all the results across Europe come out at the same time, and they're critically important elections. They're critically important in Britain, obviously, because they are the elections. Let's be very clear about this, that have brought down Theresa May, and which have possibly put Brexit back on track because of the expected runaway victory of Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. And they're important elections for Europe because they are expected to show a big pendulum swing against the centrist CDU, SPD-dominated parties in the European Parliament that have been cheerleaders and supporters of the whole drive to European integration. So they are very important elections for many reasons, both British and European.
What other countries are you looking at during this the EU elections, Alexander? What should we be on the lookout?
Well, we need to see what's going to happen in Italy, whether Salvini's party, the Northern League, will do as well as expected, and what will happen to the Five Star Movement and all the rest. We need to look at Spain and see whether parties like the Vox party are able to build on the support that they achieved in the recent parliamentary elections. We need to look at Austria, where the Freedom Party has taken a massive knock with this extraordinarily provocative publication of that video of its leader talking in what was obviously a sting to a woman that he was told was a Russian oligarch's
So it
niece.
worked.
There was no such thing. So I think so. But we'll see. We'll see whether it works
Right.
and whether, in fact, the Freedom Party has been affected by that. But we also need, first and foremost, and above all else, to look at the two big countries, to look at France, where, as I said, there's massive discontent in France. We've had the Gilets jaunes protests. We see how well the anti-EU parties, Marine Le Pen's first and foremost on the right, but also Jean-Luc Mélenchon's left-wing party, which has now become identified as an anti-EU party, wanting to improve relations with Russia. In other words, doing all that it can to offend the centrist establishment, how well they do, and whether Macron is able to hold the line. And last but not least, we need to look at Germany and see whether the ongoing unraveling of the dominant political centre cobbled together by Angela Merkel and the SPD, the Grand Coalition, will continue, and whether or not the AfD will continue to grow in strength. So we've got lots of things to look at.
Do you think that Merkel was behind what happened in Austria? I've read some
Yes.
some opinions that said Merkel was the mastermind.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Merkel was up to, but I mean, let's put it like this. She's clearly aligned very strongly with whoever was behind it. And I don't think it's coincidence that video was published by the German media. Germany, of course, and Austria are two countries with a shared history and a shared language. What is said in Germany is immediately noted and known about in Austria. And so I've no doubt at all, as I said, if Merkel herself, well, whether or not Merkel herself was personally involved, certainly she's aligned with those groups and forces in Germany and Austria that was behind this thing.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Theresa May doesn't fool anyone with her crocodile tears. Hopefully the Queen will have her dispatched like my 10 great uncles, Oliver Cromwell.
Well, I'm afraid those days are gone. I can't imagine our
She won't be
Queen.
dispatched. She'll be given a job somewhere in Brussels. That's,
Oh,
that's
no,
my
no,
that's
absolutely,
my feeling.
absolutely. Oh, no, she will. She'll. I mean, so I mean, I don't think they are crocodile tears, but we shouldn't be sorry for Theresa May. She'll do very well for herself in all sorts of attractive jobs, possibly in the City of London, definitely on the lecture circuit. Probably she'll find all sorts of nice consultancies and all kinds of things like that. She will be a very, very wealthy woman at some point before very long.
Yeah, she's just now going to start making real money. Now she's going to make the big bucks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Super chat from Two Beagles, $2. Thank you very much for that super chat. And from Reality Check, a super chat. Thoughts on Jacip Rees-Mogg for PM?
No, I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think he's angling for it. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg has achieved remarkable power and influence within the Conservative Party as a backbencher. And I think he realizes that at this moment in time, if he was to enter government, that power would actually reduce. So he's not a candidate for the leadership of the party, and he's not a candidate for prime minister. I think he realizes that at the moment, by being a leading backbencher and the chairman of the European group, the anti-European group of MPs within the Conservative Party, he is more powerful than he would be in any other position that is practically open to him.
Okay, a super chat from Penguins fan. Theresa May was calling on Assad to go. Well, good riddance to her, because I will not shed one single tear for her.
Oh,
everyone that has called for Assad to go, they've gone, except for Merkel. And I don't know how much of a voice Merkel was in the Assad must go camp. You know, Cameron and Obama and all these guys, and all of them were calling for May. All of them were calling for Assad to go.
Absolutely, and of course, Assad is still there. But for me, in some ways, an even more interesting development is the way in which looking at the people who, in July 2014, imposed sanctions on Russia, the sectoral sanctions that were imposed on Russia, and they're all gone. Every single one of them, apart from Angela Merkel, who is going.
Who is
I
going?
mean, Obama has gone, and his legacy is being trashed by his successor, and his intended successor Hillary Clinton has gone. Hollande is gone. Cameron is gone. Renzi of Italy is gone. Carl Bildt of Sweden is gone. And of course, Theresa May was a member of Cameron's government and supported his policies, and she too is gone. I mean, these people, mediocrities and worse that they were, have led Europe and the West into a blind alley. It is only right that they should go. What we need is some people of personality and character to take over from them. At the moment, in Britain, unfortunately, in the Conservative Party and in Parliament, we don't have them.
Yeah, Trudeau is about to go. I'm seeing in the chat as well. We'll see in October as well if Trudeau does go. Alexander Cameron, what's happened to him, and what do you think his legacy is?
Well,
I mean, he's the one that started all of this.
He
Not?
certainly is. He certainly is. I mean, he by the way, suddenly surfaced today when he said that he was very saddened to Theresa May's going. By the way, I don't think he's at all saddened. It's fairly well known that he and Theresa May personally didn't get on. Cameron did back her back in 2016 to take over as Prime Minister from him, not because he liked her, but because he loathes Boris Johnson, and I think he still loves Boris Johnson. Cameron, in my opinion, was a political leader with some ability, but completely unserious, very, very facile, never really grew up or grew into his job. He decided on this referendum because Faraj was pressing it and UKIP was winning elections against the Conservative Party. But he didn't really understand what he was letting loose. And when the result came through, it became completely obvious that he had no plan to go forward, and he quit far too quickly. But there we are. I mean, he's yesterday's man. I don't really think that he's somebody to waste too much time on.
All right. Super chat from Paul. And actually, I wanted to get to this as well. So thank you, Paul, for bringing this up. Q says Trump is after May for GCHQ spying on him. Is she staying on for his state visit to plead? It's odd to meet an outgoing PM. So yes, Trump is going after just about everyone who went after him. And I think it is now fairly common knowledge that the UK, Australia, Italian intelligence, they were all pretty much working in conjunction with the CIA and the FBI to spy on Trump. Papadopoulos even said that it was very much a soft coup that was being orchestrated by the UK and Australia. What do you make of this? Should May be sweating a little bit now that Trump is going to be coming, and she is implicated, I would imagine, for being one of the people behind this soft coup against the U.S. president?
The answer is I've no doubt that she is sweating over it. By the way, I think David Cameron is also sweating over it. I mean, first of all, she will be Prime Minister when Donald Trump comes. She made a desperate attempt when she first became Prime Minister, by the way, to cozy up to Donald Trump. She was almost the first leader to go and see him. And it was very, very awkward. And it's quite clear that Donald Trump has little time for her. Even then, he had little time for her. I think the more he's found out about the level of involvement of British intelligence in getting the Russiagate conspiracy theory stroke investigation going back in 2016 and 2017 and in spying on members of his campaign, I think the more angry with the British and with Theresa May he is. And I'm going to say something else, which is, I think we've done a video on it, Alex and I, specifically on this issue. But there was a fascinating article a few days ago in the Daily Telegraph which confirmed that British intelligence at the very highest level knew about Christopher Steele's dossier and discussed it. And I have no doubt that they passed it on to US intelligence, to the CIA, to Brennan and people like that, knowing full well what use Brennan would make of it. And I've no doubt, despite denials, that was discussed with ministers, and that would have included the Prime Minister of the time, who was David Cameron, and the Home Secretary, who was Theresa May. So, of course, Cameron and Theresa May and lots of other people in Britain are very, very concerned about this thing.
All right, a super chat from Helgi, 200 DKK. Great work. Thank you, Helgi, for that super chat. We really appreciate that. And a super chat from Penguins fan. The election of Tony Blair in the 90s was the beginning of the end for Britain, because it's been a downfall. Do you think that Tony Blair was perhaps one of the worst things to happen to the UK?
Well, in the word yes.
And he doesn't go away either. He's still hanging around. So that's the worst part.
Yeah, he does. I mean, modern British politics, this decayed state of British politics that we have, dates from his premiership. Before Tony Blair became Prime Minister of Britain, we had a Conservative Party, which was on the right, and which represented middle-class people, the business community, people like that. And we had a Labour Party, which was on the left, which represented working-class people, trade unions, people like that. And that was a well-functioning system. The two parties alternated power. There were times of economic crisis, as there were in the 1970s. There were times of economic progress. But it was a system that provided people with real alternatives. The system that Tony Blair created and which David Cameron inherited was one where we had this rule from a completely alienated and technocratic centre, which was far more committed to an international globalist project than it was to the real interests or concerns of the British people.
He was a true neoliberal, Tony Blair. There was so much hope when he first entered office. A lot of people saw that he could be, a great prime minister. But I mean, what a bust he turned out to be.
I never shared it.
You had him figured out from the get-go, huh?
Absolutely. From the moment he became leader, and even before.
All right.
He never impressed me.
Okay, Alexander, let's wrap it up. A couple quick comments about Assange. We're going to do a video on Assange. We'll be going for about an hour now. And thank you to everyone that has joined us on this live chat. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your super chats as well. Thank you for all your interesting questions. Guys, visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. You can get a great polo shirt as well, like the one that Alexander is wearing with the gold double-headed eagle, and it is not a Rothschild symbol or anything like that, guys. No. And of course, he has that mug. Alexander, a few words about the Duran gear that you have.
Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful polo shirt, 100% cotton, by the way, incredibly comfortable, very high quality, beautifully embroidered, and extremely comfortable to wear in hot weather and even in cooler weather. We've had both today, and I've been wearing it, and it's perfect for both. And as for the mug, like everything else, very high quality, very solid, very good stuff.
Definitely.
And big, you can drink tea, coffee, beer, whatever you like from it.
All right, definitely go to the Duran shop and help support us. And we will be announcing in the next day or two, we'll be announcing some ebooks, Alexander, stuff that we're putting together to kind of crystallize and chronicle all our videos that we've done. The first one will be on Brexit and the fall of Theresa May and the rise of the Brexit Party and Nigel Farage. So we'll be putting that ebook up very, very soon. Maybe in the next day or two, we'll put an announcement and send the notification to everyone. Alexander has written a foreword to that ebook as well. Alexander, you want to say a few words about what people could expect from the small ebook? I think it's nothing big, but it's just a nice little kind of a summary of what we've been talking about the last 3 months.
It is. I mean, it will give, I think, people an overview of what has been happening in Britain over the last couple of months, of the decline and fall of Theresa May's government, of the complete debacle that Brexit has been, of the way in which the establishment in Britain, the Remain establishment, worked incredibly hard to reverse Brexit, and of the massive backlash that this has provoked, and of the political consequences that flow from that. So it brings all that together, and it covers the points that we make in our videos, which have covered this topic all together in one place.
All right, great. And final super chat from Sparky. Theresa May should be tried in The Hague and spend the rest of her days in Spandau prison.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Well, I think I don't expect that to happen, to be honest. By the way, I agree. Not so much because of Brexit, by the way, where I think
Right.
you can be very, very angry about what happened with Brexit. But I mean, I can't say that this is a kind of war crime that would justify that kind of treatment. But let's not forget that she was involved in a missile strike against Syria, carried out without the authorization of the British Parliament, in violation of British constitutional conventions and British practice, and on the basis of a supposed chemical attack in Douma, which we know from the suppressed OPCW engineering report, about which we've done a video, which we now know was almost certainly staged. So I think that is a good cause for bringing her before a war crimes tribunal. But unfortunately, I have no expectation that it will happen, just as I have no expectation that Tony Blair, who is a criminal on a far greater scale, will be brought before any court either.
Far greater scale, absolutely. Super chat from Penguins fan, and then say a couple words about Assange Alexander. And the super chat is, what will happen to the British pound after Brexit? That's a good question, actually.
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, it will fall. And by the way, that is not a disaster. I mean, I've gone over these arguments about currencies. People get too worked up about the fact that currencies go up and down. The fall in the pound will actually be a good thing, because it will make it easier for the British economy to adjust to the economic changes that it will need to undertake after Brexit, especially if it's a no-deal Brexit. It will strengthen the productive forces within Britain by making them cheaper and more competitive. And I don't actually foresee that it will have any dramatic effect on imports. We might have a tweak up of inflation, but inflation in Britain is generally so low that we can afford it. So the pound will fall, but let's not talk about a disaster or a cataclysm. There won't be one.
Okay, and on Assange Alexander, 170 years, I think, is the number that he could be facing in prison. If he is extradited to the United States, they are going to be pressing the Espionage Act against him. This is exactly what WikiLeaks and Assange predicted. There was an article by Caitlin Johnson, which really has a good kind of summarization as to how Assange saw it all the way back in 2010. That if it comes to this, I will get extradited to the U.S. and they will use the Espionage Act against me. I think Caitlin even has the tweet from 2010 where WikiLeaks states that, and here we are today.
It's an outstanding article, and everybody should read it if they want to understand and recall what has happened. I mean, it is a total vindication, not just of what Assange has been saying all these years, but what his legal team have been saying. I mean, it nails, or it should nail, the lie that he fled to the Ecuadorian embassy and sought asylum there in order to escape this case in Sweden. His point was that he was always prepared to cooperate with the Swedes. He was prepared to cooperate with the Swedes in Britain and meet them there, but he wasn't prepared to go to Sweden because Sweden has a history of simply handing over people to the United States, and that he was always worried that he would be handed over by the Swedes to the United States and face a prosecution under the Espionage Act. And here we are, 9 years later, and that is exactly the fate that he is facing now. Now, all I will say about the indictment that's been brought against him, I've read it. We're going to do a proper video, detailed video about it. I think it is an incredible attack on freedom of the media. It criminalizes independent investigation. It criminalizes investigative journalism. It criminalizes the use that journalists make of sources. I personally think that it is a frontal attack on the protections of the media under the First Amendment. I think if Assange ever finds his way to the United States, it will end up in the US Supreme Court. I think if he wins the case under the First Amendment there, that will be a huge blow for free speech and for the press. If he doesn't, then we are looking at a very grim media environment indeed. And I should quickly add that anybody who says that Julian Assange is not a journalist and that he is being indicted for activity which is not journalism needs to read the indictment. Even Rachel Maddow, no less, has grasped the point that this is an attack on the media. So if anybody, on the freedom of the media, I should say, anybody who cares about the freedom of the media, on the freedom of journalists to do their job, not Rachel Maddow, but people like Gareth Porter, people like John Solomon, people like Sarah Carter, people like that, to do their work properly, people like Seymour Hersh, people like the late Robert Parry, should be very, very worried about this indictment.
So even people like Rachel Maddow, Alexander, are finally waking up to what's going on.
Yes, yes. In fact, can I just say, there is another outstanding article by Caitlin Johnson which makes exactly that point.
Okay, well, we'll be following this story, and we will get a video on that as well, probably going up this weekend. The final super chat from Connor McQueen. Alexander, we'll leave it at that because it's a good super chat. Theresa May couldn't deliver a pizza.
Well, quite true.
But probably not.
Probably not. Probably not. Well, she could dance apparently. I mean, she had a genius. She even lost her voice at key moments. I mean, moments when she had to make great speeches, and what would happen would be she would lose her voice. I mean, let's be frank about it. She was a hopelessly bad prime minister. Anybody who pretends otherwise, and there are very few people in Britain who pretend otherwise, are simply not facing the truth of what she was. She was a terrible prime minister, the worst I have known in my lifetime.
And she came along at probably the worst possible time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in 2016, Britain didn't perhaps need a Churchill, but it certainly needed a strong, purposeful prime minister who would be able to unite the country and deliver Brexit. And what he got instead was Theresa May, and what a disaster that has been.
All right. Well, let's look forward and see what comes next. We'll see who's going to be leading the UK onwards in the Brexit negotiations. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone that joined us in this live stream. Thank you to everyone that sent us super chats. Thank you guys for all your support. Remember to hit that like button. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. Also, make sure to click the notifications bell. Guys, YouTube unsubscribes people all the time. If you click that notifications bell, YouTube also makes it so that you didn't click the notifications bell, so just double check just to make sure that you're getting updates every time we publish a video. Alexander, thank you very, very much to everybody that tuned in, wherever you are in the world, morning, afternoon, evening. Have a great day, night, morning. Take care, everybody. Take care, Alexander.
And see you all soon.
See you all soon. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
No.